Hi, and welcome to Dockside with Deb. In this weekly show, we'll talk to people who are doing some pretty cool things in sailing and experts in their field. I'm Deborah Diel, sailor, founder of MySail, and your host for today. Dockside with Deb is recorded live, so you can join in and ask your own questions. To find out more, head to mysail.team/Dockside with Deb. Let's get started. All right, guys, we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Dockside with Deb. I'm here today with Adrian Pettifor, who is experienced search and rescue aviation specialist in Australia. Adrian's going to talk to us about some of the search and rescue technology that's used, some of his background in search and rescue, and a few stories about yachts that he's gone out to help rescue. Adrian, let's start off by getting you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into search and rescue.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Deb, and everyone. So I guess I sort of literally fell into the role of aviation and search and rescue. I discharged from the Army in about middle of 2003, where I'd spent 7.5 years as an infantry soldier. The only thing I really knew about aviation at the time was how to jump out of helicopters and try not to get shot while doing it. My intention was to stay in the security industry and actually go over to the United Kingdom and do some work over there. I had a friend at the time who worked for the company that I work for now, and I went to visit him at work in Darwin just to have a look to see what he did. And out of interest in the surveillance space. The chief observer at the time was there doing some recruiting, so I ended up having an interview with him, and he offered me a job, and that was about 17 years ago. So I started off as a surveillance aircrew member on our border force contract, and about 10 years ago I moved to Adelaide, where I got seconded onto our bid team for the Australian Maritime Safety Authority search and rescue contract, which we were successful in winning, and that contract started in 2014. So I was involved in the project as an aircrew advisor for the implementation of the Challenger aircraft, and through that project we bought and modified 4 Bombardier Challenger 604 jet aircraft under contract with the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. So we're their Tier 1 search and rescue provider. We have 4 aircraft based in Cairns, Melbourne and Perth, and with the 4th aircraft that rows between the 3 bases. So yeah, that's been my life for the past 6 or 7 years now, and a very interesting job, very dynamic. Every day is different, and as we spoke about a bit earlier, the search and rescue industry is very volatile and random. So yeah, every day is different.
Yeah, it sounds like it is, especially from our earlier conversation. For the benefit of our viewers, tell us a little bit more about, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and what did the Challenger aircraft do from a search and rescue point of view, and kind of what does your role involve?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the client relationship manager for our contract with AMSA. So my role on a day-to-day basis is, I guess, overseeing that contract, providing support to our operations team and our aircrew and flight crew, just to ensure that the aircraft remain operational, and provide support to the aircrew to, I guess, equip their role with AMSA. So we have about 53 odd observers that operate in the aircraft, and 34 odd pilots spread across the 3 bases. And they're on 30 minutes notice to move during the day. So from the time they receive a call from the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre, which is the centre that receives and coordinates, I guess, calls for assistance based in Canberra. They then in turn task the aircraft. From the time we receive that task, we have 30 minutes during the day to launch the aircraft, or 60 minutes by night. So From there, depending on the task, of course, the aircraft heads out and acquits the task or prosecutes the task. The type of tasks that we're involved in can range from beacon searches when EPIRBs, or emergency indicating radio beacons, are activated, through to top cover jobs for helicopters that might be going out to do medevac rescues from merchant vessels or cruise ships, through to overland tasks. So we often get tasks for missing full drives, injured motorcyclists that are doing long distance touring and that sort of thing.
And so if you're tasked to go out to a yacht rescue, what type of kind of support are you able to provide through the Challenger aircraft?
Yeah, sure. So I guess from the time of receiving the call, we'll head out, if it's a beacon homing, for example. We have a direction finder on the aircraft which is able to detect the signal from the EPIRBs. So EPIRBs transmit on a 406 megahertz frequency. And most beacons these days have a GPS capability in them. So we'll often get a GPS position on the beacon. So we'll head out to that and using the electro-optics turret on the aircraft, evaluate what's happening on the scene and then provide assistance from there. So that could be communications relay back to the Rescue Coordination Centre, or we can actually deliver stores or drop stores from the back of the aircraft as well. So we carry a range of stores containers. We can drop radios and satellite communications to sat phones to vessels, as well as life rafts. And we can drop what's called self-locating data marker buoys as well. So basically buoys that go in the water and provide drift and temperature back to the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre. So.
Well, and that's interesting. So talk to us about the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre, and especially, as you said, you can drop in beacons to talk about the drift and, I'm trying to read your words back to you, but the currents, I guess. How does that work? How does that support a rescue of, say, a yacht or somebody who might have gone overboard?
Yeah, sure. So, so the self-locating data marker buoys, basically, they'll mimic a drift of a vessel or persons in the water or life rafts. So if someone's had to evacuate into a life raft, we can put these into the water and they'll provide a tracking, if you like, and provide the ability to relocate that life raft or vessel. There's a fairly new beacon that we've recently employed onto the aircraft that provides the previous couple that we've put in the water actually provide up to a month's worth of GPS locations as these drift around. So they're quite a capable piece of equipment that we can deploy actually. So and then yeah, as a couple of the yacht SAR tasks that we've done have been deploying communications equipment. So often we find that either communications are intermittent with the Rescue Coordination Centre or non-existent if they've received damage. So I guess the most important thing is to try and establish communications with a vessel that's in distress, to try and determine the nature of distress and whether they have to evacuate or whether we send out a surface asset to try and provide assistance in that way.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre and you're going out and providing kind of information and communications back to them. And then what do they do with that information? Can you talk us through a little bit about how the kind of Joint Rescue Coordination Centre works to try to support a search and rescue mission?
Yeah, so I guess if we take the example of a beacon being set off, an EPIRB, they transmit on a frequency via a satellite constellation. So the COSPAS SARSAT network is basically a not-for-profit intergovernmental system that utilises a series of satellites that are in orbit. There's, I guess, 3 systems of satellites. There's what's called a low Earth orbiting satellite, a geostationary satellite, and there's a fairly new constellation called medium Earth orbiting satellites, or MEOSAR, which I'll talk about shortly. So the EPIRB will set off the signal via the satellite. It will be received via the satellite system, and that goes down to what's called a mission control centre through a local user terminal, and then that mission coordination centre, I guess, analyses and decodes that signal, determines the most appropriate rescue coordination centre to send that to, depending on the type of beacon and the registration of that beacon and I guess the nation of origin of that beacon. In the example of it being an Australian beacon, so that'll send through to our Joint Rescue Coordination Centre in Canberra. They'll receive that signal and then they'll go into, I guess, an intelligence gathering phase. So one of the, I guess, my biggest recommendations when talking about EPIRBs and beacons is that is to register them. It's a free service on the AMSA website. And the advantage of registering the beacon is that you can upload photos of your vessel, you can log next of kin, and you can also log trips that you might do. So say, for example, if you're doing the Sydney to Auckland race or something like that, or even a local regatta, or even if you're overland, you know, riding your bicycle across the Nullarbor or something like that, you can log your trip on the AMSA website. So when they receive this signal, they'll the first point of call for them basically is the registration point. And then they go into the intelligence gathering phase. So they'll start ringing next of kin, finding out whether you are out in your yacht or whether you're tucked up nice and neatly in bed for the night, and go through that sort of you know, gathering of information to see whether that signal that they've received may be valid. And if it is, then obviously they start to think about the next phase of the rescue. So that might be tasking assets, and that would be dependent on the position of the signal that's received. In the example for a yacht that's fairly close inshore, they might task a helicopter to go out and have a look. Or if it's something like the Hollywood Boulevard or some other vessels that we have a fairly extensive distance from shore, the Challenger aircraft is probably the asset that they're going to task. It's quite fast and it's got an extended range, so that'll be generally the asset that they task to go out, and that's just another tool in the toolbox, I guess, of gathering the intelligence. So once we get on scene, then we'll have a look and see what's going on. Again, either drop communications equipment if we don't have communications with the vessel, or we can talk to them on some of the various equipment that we've got on the aircraft as well. So,
wow, it's very extensive. And you mentioned Hollywood Boulevard, so that's an interesting one because it's a yacht and even some of the crew that a lot of our viewers may know. And so you were involved in the rescue mission for Hollywood Boulevard in 2018, I believe it was. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And we actually have a short video I'm going to try to play. So should I play that straight away and maybe talk us through what you've seen, or do you want to give us a bit of the background first?
I can give you a bit of the background first. So, so I wasn't on the aircraft for this one, but I'm acutely aware of the outcomes of the job. Mm. So yeah, the Hollywood Boulevards, it was a Sydney to Hobart vessel back in the 2017-2018 Sydney to Hobart race. And then on its return to Sydney, the ferry crew struck a sunfish on the way back. They were about 150 nautical miles northeast of Tasmania at the time, just crossing over the Bass Strait. And I don't know if you've ever seen a sunfish or not. I wasn't aware of how big and ugly they were until I was became aware of the Hollywood Boulevard case. But they're a very large fish. They are quite ugly. and they swim on the surface of the water. So the Hollywood Boulevard struck one of these, and it did some extensive damage to their rudder. So they weren't in a good position. The weather at the time was fairly ordinary. It was sort of anywhere between 4 to 6 metre swells on 30 to 40 knots of wind. So not a very nice place to be in a boat that you can't steer. They had intermittent communications back with the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre, but they were able to let them know that they were in trouble, they were in distress. The JRCC tasked the Essendon Challenger out of Melbourne to go and gather some more intelligence or some more information on what was occurring. We got out there, and the video will show we dropped a stores container which contained some communication equipment, where they had some discussions with the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre. It was determined that they were going to abandon the yacht. So subsequently, the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre tasked 2 helicopters, one out of Victoria and one out of New South Wales, to go and assist the rescue. So there were 6 persons on board at the time, and they ended up winching 3 into each of the helicopters. And you'll see shortly in the video that the winches were actually conducted out of the life rafts as opposed to off the vessel. So when the helicopters got on scene, they decided that it was too risky to winch from the yacht given the conditions. So they asked the crew to abandon into the life rafts, and then subsequently winch from there. I've had the pleasure of meeting one of the rescue swimmers from the helicopter on the day, and he says it's one of his most challenging rescues that he's done. So see also in the video that the wind and currents are basically opposing each other, and he was getting dragged away from the life rafts where he was trying to rescue the crew from. So quite a challenging rescue all up. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's play this video. It's just under 2 minutes, so I'll share my screen now and play that.
The first thing you see here is the Challenger delivering the stores container. So we have 400 metres of rope onto the main store. The idea is that we throw that rope bag out first, and it deploys rearwards with that 400 metres of rope in it. And then we deploy the main store about 3 seconds later. On the deck of the vessel there, you can see some of the rope that the crew is recovering. And obviously the idea is that they eventually recover the store, which contain the radios and the sat phones in it. And this has now jumped to the time where the helicopters have got on scene and are effecting the rescue. So the crew have abandoned into the life raft here, and you can see the rescue swimmers just gone into the water. And then one at a time, he directs the crew to get into the water and start to get to him. You can see he's getting dragged away from the life raft quite quickly. And they actually were trying to use the helicopter, if you like, to drag the crew member closer, the rescue swimmer closer to the raft each time that he went into the water.
Wow.
Yeah, so fairly decent swells there.
Yeah.
You know, probably 25 or 30 knots of wind on the surface at that stage. So
yeah, and being an ocean swimmer, I know they always look a lot bigger when you get in them than they do when you're looking from a distance. So I'm sure for the people who are actually in the water right then and there, it would be massive.
Yeah, so and they subsequently managed to recover the Hollywood Boulevard as well, and it participated in this year's Sydney to Hobart as well. So
yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Which is a good outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that gives you a bit of an idea, though, I guess, of the dropping of the Challenger and how that works to kind of drop some assets initially, and then the helicopter coming out to rescue, and just the difficulty of being able to do that. And we'll go more into the details of actual helicopter rescues a little bit later. At the moment, we have a question from the audience. Many countries use much larger propeller-driven aircraft, such as Hercules for SAR. I think this is a Canadian member of our audience. And would you like to comment on the decision to use the Challenger jet as opposed to those heavier aircraft?
Yeah, sure. So we'll have a look at I guess, the size of the Australian search and rescue region shortly. It's one of the largest in the world. It's 52 million odd square kilometres, or about 1/10 of the Earth's surface. It is an extensive area to try and cover. So I guess that the Challenger jet gives us a couple of things. It gives us speed to start with. It's got about 8 hours endurance. So basically we can get out approximately 1,350 nautical miles. We can spend about an hour on scene at that distance, and then recover back to the base of origin. Of course, if there's alternate aerodromes there that we can land for additional fuel and that sort of thing, we can increase that range in that area as well. So, yeah, those larger propeller aircraft do give us some good range. Certainly C-130s and that sort of thing have extensive range. But I guess the Challenger gives us the advantage of speed as well to get to the longer range sorts of tasks. I've got a couple of slides I think that we'll share shortly that sort of show the challenges of the Australian search and rescue region and the sort of ranges that we have to react to. One of our very early yacht rescues that we assisted with was the yacht Jedi, and it was being delivered from South Africa down to New Zealand, and it got dismasted about 880 nautical miles southwest of Perth, southwest of Western Australia, and there's a lot of nothing out there, so it's a really bad spot to get into trouble. And I'm sure most, if not all, of your viewers would be familiar with Tony Bullimore, who was a very well-known rescue many years ago that got rolled over or capsized in a similar sort of area. And it was a defence asset, a P3 Orion, that eventually got down there, located his vessel. And then the HMAS Parramatta, I believe, was a Australian naval frigate that eventually got down there and affected that rescue. So it's a very challenging area of our search and rescue region to get to. So the range and the speed afforded by the Challenger enables us to sort of get into those areas. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we've got another question from the audience. So I'll ask that and then let's get into that rescue a little bit more. So thanks, Alex, for your question. He asks, would that previous rescue have been possible after dark? Good question.
Is that the Hollywood Boulevard?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, yeah, so the Challenger has an electro-optics turret with an infrared capability on it. So it has quite good nighttime imagery. We also carry night vision goggles, which the observer crew can use. So we have 3 crew members down the back. One is on the console operating the search sensors, one of those being the infrared electro-optics camera. And the two that we have 2 other observers which basically sit on either side of the aircraft with night vision goggles for nighttime search. So certainly we could have done the Challenger component of that search during night. We can drop stores at night as well from what's called lower safe altitude. So in that area, or greater than 20 miles offshore for us is 1,500 feet. So we can drop stores from that height at night. Of course, there is a challenge of recovering those stores at night too. It's pretty dark out there. So A, being able to locate them to start with, and B, being able to intercept them with things like broken rudders, as the Hollywood Boulevard had, would have been challenging. And then the winching would have been done during the day. So that's
Okay.
not something they would have done at night out there.
Yeah, wow. So if they got into trouble just before dark, they might have gotten something dropped to them, had to try to get it after dark without rudder, and then wait to the day to actually get pulled off. Yeah, good question. Thank you, Alex. And getting back to kind of a couple of the other rescue missions you've done, I know you've got some photos maybe to share. Tell us about a couple of the other rescues and maybe what's made them unique, or what kind of we can draw from those.
Yeah, sure. So actually a good example of that scenario that you just discussed about having to wait, I guess, is another one of our early on tasks that we received was another yacht called the Val, which was off the east coast of Australia this time, about 100 miles off Newcastle way from memory, out to the east. They also coincidentally had rudder issues, a damaged rudder, and there was two persons on board that yacht, I believe, from memory. We did an initial task out of there. We departed from Cairns at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We got out to the yacht, and it was just approaching last light. So we did an initial drop of a stores container with some communications equipment in it. Unfortunately, they weren't able to recover that store just due to not being able to manoeuvre the vessel to get to it. And it was the last opportunity to drop due to the last light. Or the last opportunity we elected to drop due to the last light and have an opportunity to recover. We subsequently recovered that aircraft to Cairns and sent it back out on a second sortie with another crew on it to relocate that vessel and then assist a police asset that launched out of, I think that was out of Newcastle. It was a police vessel, Nemesis, that steamed out overnight. And managed to intercept the yacht at about 10 o'clock that night in some very trying conditions as well. So they were punching through again 5 to 6 metre swells on 40 and up to 50 knots of wind. And subsequently the police crew of that vessel, Nemesis, actually received some bravery awards at the National SAR Council Awards a couple of years ago. So I guess another example of how each rescue is different, I guess, and the type of assets that they allocate to each task can be different. So,
and I guess also the type of assets they have available. If you are somewhere that more remote, you may not have a police boat available to go out.
That's right. Yeah, the East Coast is a lot more populated, of course, and a lot more asset rich, if you like. Mm. From helicopters to recovery vessels and surface assets. Or you start operating off of the west coast, northwest coast, of course, it's a lot more remote, a lot less assets available up that way, so less helicopters, less rescue vessels. So,
and when you drop in stores, how, I guess, often do people actually manage to recover those from a yachting point of view versus, I guess, especially like you said, if there's no rudder, that would be a very difficult task to be able to, you guys have to drop them so that they get to the yacht and the yacht has to be able to collect those.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a fine art. So the aircraft's doing it at 180 knots when we drop a store out the back. So that's equivalent to about 100 metres a second. Yeah. And we've got 400 metres of rope attached to the store when we throw it out. So the idea is that you deploy that rope bag roughly 3 seconds before you get to your target. And then about 3 seconds later, you deploy the main store. The idea is that you get a little bit of forward throw still on that main store before the parachute opens and starts to deploy down to the water. The idea with that rope is that you drop it close to or over the target so that they can, of course, recover the store. Now, obviously, flying an aircraft at 200 feet at 100 metres a second is again, a challenge. And it is an art that needs to be practiced regularly, I guess, to get accurate. But the stores are generally recovered more often than they're not, I guess. So, but as you can see in that video from the Hollywood Boulevard, some of the conditions that you're dropping in, you've got wind drift, you've got some significant swells and that sort of thing. So, yeah, the Hollywood Boulevard is a good example. We dropped across the bow of that vessel, as you saw, and we got a fairly good split of the rope across that bow. And then they managed to intercept the rope from there. So we carry multiple items of each store. So we carry 2 life rafts on board the vessel. We carry 3 of each type of stores container with pretty much 3 of each type of store to go in. So radios, satellite phones, EPIRBs, and that sort of thing. So we have, I guess, multiple opportunities to try and get a store to a vessel.
Yeah, it's quite amazing though that you've got a good success rate when you think about the challenges of making that happen. Talking about that, let's talk through some of the technology and the equipment that you use on these aircraft to make these rescues happen.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I might share that PowerPoint then, Deb, and sort of, I guess, give us an idea of some of the challenges that we face in
yeah, sounds good.
I guess our search and rescue region and how we overcome that. So,
and if anybody in our audience is having trouble, just pop something in the chat. But nothing yet, so I think we're all good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, sort of as we touched on before, I guess for those that aren't aware, that's the Australian search and rescue region that we cover. So fairly extensive. It is about 52 million square kilometres, a tenth of the Earth's surface. So a fairly large, responsibility, I guess, of AMSA and the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre. And as you can see, out to the west and the southwest there can be particularly challenging. And even with the range of the Challenger, the 604, there is still some areas down there that we just can't get to. So, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about future, developments of SAR and how we're hoping to close that gap, I guess. So, so this this data is getting a little old now, but that's a 12-month period in the financial year of 17-18, and that shows the number of SAR tasks or SAR cases that the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre were responsible for and tasked an asset or were aware of, if you like, or received distress calls for. So 800 odd tasks, I think, in that 12-month period. That were actually prosecuted. A lot more, I guess, calls for assistance or potential tasks, but that didn't eventuate into a live SAR, if you like. So again, sort of shows the challenges, particularly those longer range SAR tasks there. Yeah,
and I was going to say there are a few that are a massive range away from Australia. So. Looking at these little red dots, is the Challenger able to reach all of these, or kind of how far can it get out? Just to give people a bit.
Quite a good percentage of those. There's a bit of a slide there that shows some of the range of the aircraft. So that's each of the aircraft based in Perth, Cairns, and Essendon, and originating from there. So the extents of those range rings, if you like, is 1,350 nautical miles from the point of origin. That provides about 1 hour time on task at the extent of that range ring, and then recovery to the airfield that you're left from. So of course, if there's other aerodromes that you could refuel at, you would extend those ranges extensively. The challenge, I guess, there is as you get more remote, you need to be able to plan for alternate places to land due to aircraft issues, weather issues, and that sort of thing. So that can reduce your range a little bit. But if you have a look at the example out of Perth, I suppose, there's you can see the 2 green dots just outside the range rings there being Christmas Island and Cocos Keeling Islands. up to the far northwest there. The aircraft could effectively, heading in one direction, easily reach those in one hop. You could refuel at one of those islands and then extend your range further out to the west. And then, of course, further out west, you've got La Reunion Island as well, so you could pop in through there. And so it gives you a fairly good coverage of that western area. And similarly, out to the east there, you've got all the Pacific Islands. And we quite regularly help the Pacific nations. So Papua New Guinea, we often head up to and help search for missing banana boats. There's been some unfortunate ferry incidents up there that we've assisted with. And then further out to the east to the Solomons and that sort of area as well. So.
Yeah, it's quite extensive. And we were kind of looking at some of the racing that happens around Australia. And, you know, this would really, most of it is coastal, which obviously it covers, but even kind of a Noumea race or almost an Auckland race. And I know from Perth, they run, you know, some longer range races, and it looks like, you know, that's pretty much all covered.
Yeah, we got a request for assistance from New Zealand last year, some stage later last year. They had a vessel in distress. It was about 1,000 miles east of Wellington. So we were looking to task the Essendon jet out of Essendon and drop into either Auckland or Wellington, refuel overnight, and then head out the next morning to try and assist coordinate the rendezvous of a rescue asset as with the vessel in trouble. So didn't end up occurring. The New Zealand RCC ended up looking after the task itself, but it gives you an example, I guess, of how we can assist the neighbouring nations as well. So
yeah, nice.
Right, get these slides working. Yeah, so I guess that's the Challenger aircraft there. So as I said, we've got 4 of those based across 3 bases in Cairns, Perth and Essendon in Melbourne. And they are significantly different to the corporate jet that they started life as, full of leather couches and mahogany bars and that sort of thing. So we purchased them as corporate jets, and then we did a fairly significant modification to them, if you like. So those couple of images on the left show what they started life as, and then the ones on the right are pretty much what they look like now. So I guess those front 2 seats there, you can see the drop masters and visual observer seat, and you can see we've cut in some larger panoramic sized windows on either side, which is some fairly extensive structural modifications, if you like, to an aircraft. So they provide the opportunity for better visual observation from the aircraft, and that's also where we employ the night vision goggles from. And you can just see behind the right-hand seat there, if you like, the mission system console, which is where the aircraft mission coordinator works from, and he employs the various sensors on the aircraft, which are sort of laid out in this diagram here. So we have a very capable surface detection radar, which is optimised for sort of small targets, if you like, so in that life raft and small vessel or overturned vessel sort of area. We also have the Westcam MX-15 high-def electro-optic turret. So there's several camera payloads in that turret, one of them being the infrared camera that we can use either by day or by night. And there's also a low light and a spotter lens in there, which gives us significant zoom capability. So we can sort of generally read the names off of vessels or off the back of merchant vessels or yachts at a fairly decent range. So gives us a good visual capability once we acquire the target that we're looking for. And one of our key pieces of equipment, if you like, is the search and rescue direction finder. So that's the piece of equipment that we use to analyse and decode the EPIRBs, particularly on the 406 frequency that they transmit on. and we can obtain their GPS position from those and display that on the screen, and it will come up on our map overlay as well. So provided we get a valid signal, if you like, from that EPIRB, it'll provide a marker on the screen with an indication of that EPIRB's position. And they also transmit on another frequency, which is 121.5 megahertz, and that's an audible frequency, which we can detect, and that direction finder will provide a line of bearing, if you like, on the mission system display that the aircraft can fly down, and through a series of DF cuts or turns and a triangulation process, if you like, can do that final definition of the position of that beacon, if you like. So we also have some aviation location sort of inputs, if you like. So a traffic collision avoidance system and a system called ADSB, which is a broadcast system that aircraft transmit on. So we can also do aircraft intercept, location and intercept for aircraft that may be in trouble, lost, visual aircraft lost above cloud and that sort of thing. So we can assist them as well down to the ground. And then once we get to the area or the incident, we can, as we've discussed, deliver a range of stores as well. So.
And that's an interesting point. You just mentioned the clouds, aircraft being lost above clouds, but what if you are working in an environment where it is very, say, low-lying cloud or very foggy or something? Can you still operate in those circumstances?
Yes, so it depends again on the environment and if we're over land, any terrain that may impact the search. So it depends on the altitude of the terrain. Obviously in mountainous areas, we've got some restrictions on how low we can fly. Once we go offshore, as we call it, which is pretty much 20 miles from land, we can come down to as low as 1,000 feet in cloud to try and determine what's called visual meteorological conditions. If we can obtain VMC at 1,000 feet, then we can come down as low as 200 feet to conduct store researching or stores delivery. If we are unfortunately still in cloud at that time, then we have to maintain what's called lower safe altitude, which is 1,500 feet above the water. So it can be challenging, but then with the electronic suite of sensors that we have, that gives us a fair bit of assistance as well. So I guess an example of that is we had a small light aircraft impact some high terrain off of Tasmania earlier last year. That was particularly challenging because the terrain was quite high and the cloud base was quite low. So whilst we could intermittently pick up the electronic distress signal from the aircraft, we were unable to visually determine what had occurred or locate any sort of the incident site, if you like. So it can be challenging.
Yeah, I guess when you're over water, you don't have to worry about the land impact, but other challenges to kind of deal with. And that's really great. That gives us good indication, I guess, of the level of, the amount of technology and that is available to assist people when they do get into trouble. Can you talk us through, if somebody is out on the yacht and doing a delivery or whatever it is, and they get into trouble, most people wouldn't have been in that situation before, it'd be the first time. And even if you've done your safety and sea survival training, you're kind of in a panicked state, or you could be, what are some of the things that they should think through, and what's going to be the, process from calling for help through to hopefully getting rescued?
Yeah, so I guess there's obviously various means of communication off of vessels. Some have obviously AIS, automatic identification system. I think that's becoming more commonplace now in the smaller vessel sort of environment. So there's ability to transmit there. Obviously, you've got satellite phones, which are becoming more commonplace as well. HF radio, which we sort of discussed a little bit earlier. And then you've got your emergency position indicating radio beacons, your EPIRB. So I guess there's various levels of notifying the various agencies that there is a distress situation. Let's say in the worst case that you need to set off the EPIRB. That will generally be received, and we'll talk about, I guess, in the next generation or second generation beacons shortly. But the more recent deployment of the MEO-SAR satellite constellation that we spoke about earlier, that provides much greater coverage over the Earth's surface of beacon detections, and also the opportunity for a greater number of satellites to detect that signal much faster. So that signal will be detected by the MEO-SAR constellation. That will then get sent through a mission coordination centre that, as I said earlier, analyses, I guess, the signal and sends that notification onto the appropriate rescue coordination centre. Once they have that beacon detection, that's where they go into their intelligence gathering phase. If you registered your beacon, which is a very smart thing to do, they'll be able to see quite quickly the details of your vessel, your voyage, if you've logged that on the AMSA website, but again, your next of kins or your emergency contacts, that sort of thing. So they go into their intelligence gathering phase. If none of that information is available, fairly quickly they'll deploy an asset. Depending on the situation, will depend on what the most appropriate asset might be. So it might be something like a local Coast Guard, a volunteer Coast Guard vessel, volunteer marine rescue vessel. It could be passing ship traffic that they have information on. It could be a helicopter for short range inshore type work. Or it could be the Challenger jet aircraft, depending on the range and again the location of the detected signal. So from the time of tasking the Challenger, if that's the asset that they task, to the time that we're required to depart is 30 minutes by day or 60 minutes by night. The aircraft will depart out to the scene at best speed, and of course, depending on where you are, will depend on the time taken for the aircraft to get there. So at I guess the highest speed, the aircraft does about 460 to 480 knots, so it's quite a fast machine. If you're 200 miles off the coast, you should see an aircraft in probably an hour to an hour and a half after tasking. Or if you're somewhere like the yacht Jedi was at 880 miles off the coast, it might be a little bit longer. So obviously the Challenger gets on scene and then I guess works out what the best course of action from there is. The aircraft has a constant satellite link to the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre. So we can send back any sort of data, either text data on the sightings. We can send video imagery streamed live from the optics turret, or still captures of any of the imagery that we get. So the Rescue Coordination Centre can see fairly much in real time what the aircraft can see on scene, and they'll make a decision on how to react from there, I guess, whether it's dropping a satellite phone to get better communications, or whether it's to drop a life raft for the vessel to be able to abandon into. So
wow. So I mean, even thinking through this though, from the time of, okay, we're in trouble, we need to call for help, setting off your EPIRB, to getting that to the Joint Rescue Coordination Center and then tasking the Challenger, if that's what happens, to you getting out could easily be at least a couple hours. And that's, you know, not at a rescue stage where someone's there to actually rescue you. So, I mean, people really need to be self-sufficient and be able to kind of take care of themselves for, you know, I guess an extended period of time. And if we're thinking about, okay, so then as the next step is, you know, assume somebody else needs to come out and actually rescue you, and let's say a helicopter, hypothetically, which I know could be different things. What should people expect? And I know this is a little bit out of your area, but I'm going to ask you anyway to give us a little bit of insight as much as you can. But, you know, what should you expect if you're sitting in your yacht and you're waiting for a helicopter to come and rescue you? What do you need to know? Like, what's going to kind of happen by the time you get into between then and getting into that helicopter?
Yeah, I guess the biggest piece of advice I could give, I guess, is listen to the rescue swimmer or the winch person that comes down. They're obviously the experts. They'll have instructions for you depending on the situation. So I guess if we go back to the Hollywood Boulevard, their direction was to get the crew into the rafts because that afforded a lot more safety, of course, for the helicopter crew. Obviously, they have to be mindful of things like masts and rigging and that sort of thing. Not only getting the rescue swimmer down to the yacht, but also getting the patients, if you like, away from the vessel safely as well. So I guess that's one thing. And there's various, I guess, methods of securing the patient as well, you know, different quick application strops and that sort of thing. So yeah, listen to the rescue swimmer, and I guess as you're getting closer to the helicopter, one of their pieces of advice is don't try to help. You know, try and climb into the helicopter or anything like that. Obviously, they'll do what they have to get you in. And as you get closer, the winch operator as well will be the person that sort of coordinates getting you into the machine. So,
yeah, that's a good piece of advice, because I guess a lot of people, you know, if you still, you know, able-bodied, then you know, you probably think, oh, I can do this, and maybe your helpfulness is not very helpful.
Often people do try and help. I guess the other thing is try not to panic as well.
Mm.
One of the things that can happen in a winch rescue, I guess, is there can be some a matter of spin induced as well. I think some of the audience has probably seen there was a video circulating a little while ago about a patient that got rescued, a middle-aged or elderly-aged lady that got rescued over land on a stretcher by a helicopter crew, and it went into quite a fast spin as she was getting witched up to the helicopter, and would have been very unsettling, but can also create additional injuries and even blackout at times. So there's a couple of ways of reducing that. One of those is to try and make yourself as small as possible. So it's often caused by the downwash from the rotor of the helicopter, and often in calm wind conditions. I guess it's trying to minimise your exposure to that downdraft and keep yourself, you know, as small as possible, if you like. Again, in that Hollywood Boulevard example, you'll see they're very vertical as they get winched back up. There's other things the crew can do to try and minimise that, and that's you know, things like try and get some forward motion on the aircraft as they're winching you up. Again, reduce your cross section to the downdraft and things like that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. And I did see that video, and it looked pretty scary. Yeah. I guess if that was somebody in a stretcher, it looked like in that instance. So we've got another question from the audience, actually, from Roland. Thank you for your question. So how does the AIS assist with the aircraft location due to its limited transition power? I think I asked that correctly. I think he's asking about the personal AIS beacons that you can get. Is that right, Roland? maybe you just want to type in a bit of a clarification to that, and we'll get that answered for you. So in the meantime, I did want to just ask you finally about some of the changes that you see coming to the future of search and rescue. And so if Roland gives us a bit of clarification around his question, we'll come back to it. But yeah, in the meantime, you did mention some of the beacon technology that was changing and a few other changes that are coming. Could you talk us through what you see in the future?
Yeah, definitely. And this might go some way to answering Rowan's or Roland's question as well. So talking about the next generation or second generation beacons that are coming. So currently EPIRBs transmit on 406 megahertz, and most, if not all, GPSs now, or most, are also, EPIRBs are GPS capable as well. So they'll provide a GPS position across the satellite network to the RCC, and then they transmit on 1215 an audible signal as well, as I said before. So the rescue asset can do that final homing, if you like. So the next generations of beacons, whilst transmitting on those two frequencies, will also transmit on AIS as well. Not only will they send out the longer range signal, they'll also send out the local AIS signal on VHF, very high frequency, to give a local indication, if you like, that there's a distress occurring. For a vessel, yacht, merchant vessel, or anything else that's equipped with AIS display or an AIS receiver, that will provide a visual indication on the display, and it'll be in the form of a red circle with a red cross on it, which highlights, I guess, to that asset that there is a distress situation in the local area. VHF is generally considered to be line of sight, which at the surface of the water is, I guess, a lot less than at height with an aircraft. But it provides that opportunity, I suppose, for a local rescue. So I guess one of the things there that people will have to be mindful of is that if they do go into a local rescue, if you like, they need to advise local authorities or certainly the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre in Canberra, because they may be tasking assets because of having received that signal on the 406. So yeah, that will be one feature of the second generation beacons. And the next is that it will be transmitting, its initial burst will transmit in 3 seconds from the time that it's activated, whereas at the moment it's currently about every 50 seconds. Okay. So yeah, some additional capability there. And I guess the other thing that you'll have to be mindful of is that there is AIS SARs as well, search and rescue transponders, and also man overboard AIS beacons as well, if you like, which may go some way to Roland's question. Sorry, I didn't quite get.
Yes, and I think that is he was looking at the man overboard, the personal AIS, and I don't know what the range is on those. I know it's fairly short, but can you, from the aircraft, can you actually detect a personal AIS beacon? Yes.
So we have an AIS receiver on board the aircraft. Okay. And AMSA are just actually in the process of we're actually we have been carrying AIS SARs on the aircraft, and we're in the process of going across to radar SARs, which is I'll talk about in a minute as well. But yeah, certainly we have an AIS receiver. I guess the advantage that the aircraft gives us is height, so your line of sight is greatly increased. So provided the AIS is transmitting with sufficient strength, the aircraft can pick it up from a significantly increased range compared to what something on the surface of the water will. Again, there's atmospherics that sort of come into play and different considerations there. But there is potential for a VHF signal to receive some distance away.
Okay, interesting.
I hope that answers his question. But
yes, I think I think it does. And if anybody else has questions, then just pop them into the little Q&A section.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the other thing that we're now carrying and can deploy from the aircraft is a radar search and rescue transponder. So it's similar to an AIS SAR or an EPIRB in that when activated, it's looking, I guess, to be interrogated by the transmitted radar signal from the aircraft. Once it detects a signal or is excited by a signal from the aircraft radar, it returns a signal to the aircraft, and it provides a series of lines, if you like, on our map display. So we can do a homing to it similar to what an AIS SAR will do, but it doesn't give the actual location. It's a bearing basically down a series of lines on the radar. So another piece of technology there that we're just starting to carry and dispatch from the aircraft if required. And the other piece in the beacon space that's starting to be developed is what's called lost my train of thought there. Return link service, or RLS beacons. So they'll start to be available in various countries, or some countries, in the next couple of months. And what that will provide is the ability for the mission coordination centre, when it receives a signal from an EPIRB, is to provide a return signal to that EPIRB. And there'll be an LED of some description on that EPIRB that will change colour or illuminate, letting the person that's activated that EPIRB know that the MCC has received a signal, and that can be seconds of that EPIRB being set off. So
yeah, that's interesting, because you know, at the moment a beacon is just transmitting, so turning it into kind of a two-way device as opposed to a one-way device.
That's right, yeah. And you know, there's something that is I guess studied in the search and rescue space is casualty culture, and what a person is going through in that sort of distressed period. One of the, I guess, the key things that the return link service will provide is some certainty to the casualty, if you like, that signal's been received, and provide that bit of hope, I guess, that you know that shortly there should be some assets being tasked. So I guess it's important to note that the return signal is only from the mission coordination centre or mission control centre at the moment. It's not an indication that the rescue coordination centre has received the signal and has tasked an asset, but it would be, I guess, prudent to think that it wouldn't be that far away from having received a signal.
Yes, and I guess for most people probably going through the situation may not be as familiar with the environment and may think, good, somebody at least has heard me. And if it provides that level of reassurance, then that, you know, must be a good thing.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about the will to survive, I suppose. So yeah,
yeah, exactly. There's another question from Roland. What is your opinion with LED flares? Is that something you're familiar with?
Well, that's a good question, and no, not something I'm overly familiar with. I've had no experience with LED flares, although we did, I guess, look at them in the initial phases of the capability, but it's not something that we carry or dispatch from the aircraft. So
okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So I can't help you too much with that one.
Sorry, Roland. Great. Well, Adrian, look, we've gone a few minutes past our normal time, which is completely fine. If anybody else has any questions, or if you had any other anything else that you wanted to mention about, you know, our future of SAR?
No, I guess it's just an ever-evolving capability, I suppose. So it's very, technology, I guess, is always evolving, as we've seen with the MEO-SAR constellation. That's taken the beacon detection and response to the next level, I guess. It's reduced the detection times, increased detection accuracy. And I guess the other piece is around getting those search and rescue stores to people in an accurate manner. So,
Yes.
How we improve the accuracy of delivering those stores, and whether that's in the area of guided parachutes that some I know some countries and certainly some defence forces are looking at, whether it's remotely piloted vehicles or vessels, whether they're dispatched from the aircraft or from land or from vessels. Some of the life-saving and coastal rescue agencies are employing some remotely piloted marine vessels these days that can take out flotation devices and or indeed tow people out of trouble. So it's an ever-evolving space, and I think the next couple of years will be quite interesting in where technology takes us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and it's interesting. I've heard a few different things around the autonomous vehicle side of things. And I guess if you can do anything where you're not putting somebody in danger and you're not losing assets that you have to pay for, and they're actually getting to the people who need them, then, that seems like an important part of the puzzle, as well as the beacon, updates to the beacon technology. So Adrian, huge thanks for coming on Dockside with Deb tonight and sharing all of your experience and your thoughts on what we're going to see next in the search and rescue space. Thanks to our audience for joining us again, and we'll be back on same time next Wednesday.
No worries. Thanks, Deb. Nice to meet you, and nice to have a chat.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, very good, and thank you so much.
Please take care, and thanks all for joining.
Yeah, see you guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you'd like to know more about this program or the MySail app and community, head on over to mysail.team. That's mysail.team. Until next time, stay safe and happy sailing.